In 1999, the internet had been established for a couple of years, but it was very much seen as a cyberspace, a place distinct from our daily lives, a place where companies, governments, and non-governmental organizations and individuals had to establish themselves. You had dot-com companies that were doing home pages on the internet. You had very much more of a discussion on how to keep the internet free. What has happened since? Has the internet gotten less free? Has it grown quite different? Where did all the cypherpunks go?
I think the problem with cyberspace is that it's regarded as distinct from the real world. But actually, internet has grown together with the real world. We're already living kind of internet-mediated lives. We get most of our news these days not from the real world or digital media, but actually the real world and digital media are one. So the problem of colonizing cyberspace was that the pre-existing institutions were setting up kind of outposts in cyberspace, but there was very little inside cyberspace. What's happening today is, of course, the creation of new institutions and networks inside the digital domain, which is interacting with other institutions. For example, the development of blogs, different very big communities, and the spread of memes on the internet has really blossomed. And this has produced a situation where you're actually having a great deal of creativity and emergence on the internet. It's not just that the physical world is moving into the internet, it's actually that the internet is productive. But back in the 90s, there was still this idea of cyberspace as some kind of independent domain that maybe must be kept independent or kept controlled. So the cypherpunks were arguing that we need strong encryption to protect our privacy and freedom online, and we're seeing it as a big fight against the intelligence agencies and governments who want to impose restrictions on how citizens could use cryptography. And that fight was kind of won because the institutions failed at controlling strong cryptography.
The Clipper ship.
The Clipper ship was a good example. It was too little, too late. The idea that you would institute a chip in all communication that would enable government to listen in, of course, after getting the right court permissions and so on, to communication, but it would enable the encryption, which would be needed for making financial transactions or secure transactions. But that, of course, got everybody were worried about privacy up in arms. And in the end, it was deemed impractical. But once the cypherpunks had won, they realized that they didn't have much of a success, because most people didn't want to encrypt their email, because it was cumbersome. So sure, encryption were freely available. You could get strong encryptions if you really needed it, but most people didn't feel a need for it. So in 1999, people were really started to eclipse the cypherpunks. Certainly, secure communication were important for making finance work online, but most people were using unencrypted email and not really caring about the security. Over the last 10 years, the shift has been that the number of internet threats has increased enormously. We have very much spam, we have very much botnets, we have various forms of Trojan programs and other threats. So people have to pay attention to their security. Similarly, the debate about intellectual property and surveillance is finally getting people to realize that they might actually want to encrypt some of the communications. But not to ensure their privacy, but rather to protect themselves, for example, if they do some form of copyright infringement and protect themselves from the Motion Picture Association of America, for example.